video is on ciliary zonules, and I'm gonna read Wolff's anatomy for that. It's a chapter 12, page number 435. The ciliary zonule. The ciliary zonule is also known as zonule of Zinn, suspensory ligament of the lens. The ciliary zonule consists essentially of a series of fibers passing from the ciliary body to the lens. So the extent is from ciliary body to the lens. It holds the lens in a position and enables the ciliary muscle to act on it during accommodation. The lens and zonule form a diaphragm which divides the eye into a smaller anterior portion and larger posterior portion. The zonule forms a ring which is roughly triangular in meridional section. The base of the triangle is concave and faces the equatorial edge of the lens. The apex is elongated and curved and follows the valleys of the ciliary processes to be prolonged over the pars plana ciliaris to the ora serrata. So the ciliary zonules, these are the fibers, okay? Composition we'll see later on. These are the fibers which run from the ciliary body to the lens capsule. And depending upon their location, they are divided into 3-4 types that we'll see later on. So their extent is from the ciliary body to the lens capsule, and their function is to keep to hold the lens in a position. Also, they enable the ciliary muscle to act on them to cause the accommodation, to focus on the near objects. And the lens and the zonules, they form a diaphragm which divides the eye into two segments or two portions, anterior segment and posterior segment. Smaller anterior segment, that is anterior to the lens and the zonules, and posterior segment or posterior portion, that is larger, that is behind the lens and the zonules. And on meridional section, this zonular ring on meridional section, meridional means long axis. On meridional section, it is triangular and its base is towards the lens, that is equator of the lens, it is towards that, and apex is elongated, curved, and it runs towards or it follows the valleys of the ciliary processes and then pass over the pars plana ciliaris to the ora serrata. They pass over the pars plana ciliaris to the ora serrata. So composition of these ciliary fibers or fibrils. These fibrils are composed of a non-collagenous glycoprotein containing O and N-linked oligosaccharides, which explains their positive histochemical reaction to pars-10. So the fibrils are non-collagenous, these are elastic fibrils, and why they are more elastic in nature and not collagenous, that we'll see later on. First, their structure is non-collagenous and glycoprotein containing O and N linked oligosaccharides, which explains their positive histochemical reaction to pars-10. These fibrils are pars positive histochemically. Why? Because of these O and N linked oligosaccharides. Okay. Now these are more of elastic fibers, or more of like elastic fibers because of their size, similarity in the size, their tubular ultrastructure, and cross reactivity and amino acid and peptide profile. So fibril size, tubular ultrastructure, cross reactivity and amino acid and peptide profiles all resemble elastin, as do their resistance to collagenase and susceptibility to digestion by trypsin. Now collagen fibers are susceptible to collagenase and pepsin, while elastic fibers are resistant to collagenase and pepsin, and they are susceptible to digestion by trypsin and chymotrypsin. Okay. Now this property is utilized in intracapsular lens extraction, in which alpha chymotrypsin dissolves the zonules but has no effect on the collagenous capsule. So this property, this elastic property, it is utilized in intracapsular cataract extraction, in which the lens along with its entire capsule is taken out. Okay, it's the cataract surgery. So in that we use the alpha chymotrypsin that dissolves the zonules, but it doesn't act on the lens capsule because it's made up of the collagen. Okay, that we'll see in the lens and the lens capsule, their histochemical properties and their chemical composition. Now, So in intracapsular cataract extraction, as it is made up of the elastic fibers and not the collagen fibers, it is susceptible to alpha chymotrypsin. But lens capsule made up of the collagen fibers, it is not susceptible to alpha chymotrypsin. So alpha chymotrypsin dissolves zonules but has no effect on the collagenous capsule. Recently, it has been shown that the zonular fibril is a cysteine-rich monofibrillar component of the elastic system. Fibrillin, which in other tissues provides a template for elastin deposition during elastogenesis. Fibrillin, however, like oxytocin, another microfibrillar component of the elastic system, never becomes elasticized. The zonular fibers are strongly immunoreactive for fibrillin. Marfan syndrome, which is associated with lens dislocation, cardiovascular, and joint disease, has been shown to be due to mutations in the fibrillin gene, and the Marfan phenotype may be linked to defects in fibrillin genes on other chromosomes. So why the composition of the zonular fibers are important? Because they have two clinical significances, or we can say two things which are important. In two situations, we can apply their composition clinically. For example, why they are elastic and why they are not collagen? Because they are susceptible to chymotrypsin and trypsin and not to the collagenase and pepsin. So they are not made of collagen, they are made up of the elastic. They are elastic like fibrillin. So second, why they are pars positive? Because of oligosaccharides, okay, glycoprotein, and like elastic fibers, their size is similar, tubular ultrastructure is similar, cross reactivity, amino acid and peptide profile, it is very similar to the elastin, and also it is cysteine rich monofibrillar component of the elastic system, fibrillin. And the applied clinical anatomy of chemical composition of the zonular fibers. First is, during intracapsular cataract extraction, we use the alpha chymotrypsin to dissolve the zonules so we can extract the lens along with its entire capsule out. Then second thing, and this alpha chymotrypsin acts on the zonules that is made of the elastic fibrillin, and it doesn't act on the lens capsule. Because anyways we are taking out the lens capsule. It doesn't act on the lens capsule because lens capsule is made up of the collagen. Okay. So second thing is Marfan syndrome. Marfan syndrome, there is mutation in the gene related to the fibrillin. Okay. So that causes various phenotypes including lens dislocation, cardiovascular and joint diseases. And Marfan syndrome I'll be talking about after this video on the ciliary zonules. Now next paragraph I'm gonna read, I'm not gonna repeat because it's like on the numbers. Each zonular fiber is composed of fibrils averaging 10 nanometer in cross section, 8 to 12 nanometer, and tubular in profile. They show a microperiodicity of 12 to 14 nanometer or occasionally 40 to 55 micrometer when the fibrils are densely aggregated. Granular and finely fibrillar material can be demonstrated in and between the fibrils using cationic dyes which stain for polysaccharides. Rotary shadowing shows that individual fibers consists of beads 29 nanometer wide held together by about 4 filaments 3 to 6 nanometer in diameter. The beads have a periodicity which varies from 30 to 57 nanometer from fibril to fibril, which may be an expression of the elastic properties of the fibrils. Similar features have been observed in other tissues. I don't think it's very significant clinically, so I'm not gonna repeat that. Although it can be seen that main components of the suspensory apparatus run a more or less complex but continuous course from the ora serrata to the edge of the lens, it is useful to keep in mind four main topographic zones: the pars orbicularis lying on the pars plana, the zonular plexus between the ciliary processes, the zonular fork, the point of angulation of the zonule at the midzone of the ciliary valleys, and the anterior equatorial and posterior limbs of the zonule. Also there is hyaloid zonule. Okay, so this paragraph is important. What they are saying that these zonules They are from the ciliary body to the lens, but they also run from the ora serrata to the lens. Okay, so depending upon the location, topographically, there are four zones. First is pars orbicularis, that lies on the pars plana. Then zonular plexus, that lies in between the ciliary processes. And then zonular fork. Zonular fork, it has got angulation in the midzone of the ciliary processes. Okay, and then the four limbs. Okay, four limbs of the zonule: anterior, that is pre-equatorial, then equatorial, then post-equatorial or posterior limb, and also there is hilar zonule. Okay, structurally, the anterior zonule runs mainly from the pars plana to the pre-equatorial lens. So pre-equatorial, obviously, as the name suggests, from the pars plana to the pre-equatorial lens, but it is supplemented from the pars plicatum. While the posterior zonule runs chiefly from the pars plicatum to the post-equatorial lens, and it is supplemented from the pars plana. The equatorial zonule passes from pars plicatum to the lens equator. The hilar zonule is a flimsier structure and can be imagined as being plastered as a thin layer deep to the main suspensory apparatus to run a course from pars plana to the lens at the edge of the patellar fossa, where it attaches to the hyalocapsular zonule corresponding to the annular fibers of Wiegers ligament. Okay, so these limbs of the zonular fibers, pre-equatorial, that is anterior equatorial, then posterior, that is post-equatorial, and hilar zonule. So anterior zonule or pre-equatorial zonule, as the name suggests, runs from the pars plicatum to the pre-equatorial region of the lens capsule, supplemented by the pars plicatum. Then second is equatorial. Equatorial from the pars plicatum to the lens equator, and then third is posterior limb, that is post-equatorial fibers. They run from the pars plicatum to the post-equatorial region of the lens capsule, supplemented by pars plana. Okay, now hilar zonule. Hilar zonule, it runs from the hyalocapsular ligament to the pars plana. Okay, so what is hyalocapsular ligament? Hyalocapsular ligament, see the name, hilar and capsular. So hilar related to the vitreous and capsule related to the lens capsule. Okay, so hyalocapsular ligament means there is a patellar fossa. It is the vitreous, okay, this vitreous. This is the posterior part, this is anterior part. Anteriorly there is a fossa here, and in this fossa, it accommodates the lens, okay, which is accommodates the lens, and this fossa is called as patellar fossa. And in between the lens and this patellar fossa, or the anterior vitreous membrane, there is a space. It is called as Berger space, that we'll see later on in the vitreous anatomy. Now, this fossa, this patellar fossa has got a margin, and at this margin, these hilar zonules are attached. These hilar zonules from the this patellar capsular margin to the pars plana. So hyalocapsular ligament is this hilar and the lens capsule. This adhesion is not distinct anatomically, and it is said to be stronger in young individuals and weakens with the age. Okay, so hyalocapsular ligament, that is the condensation of the vitreous here near the patellar fossa margin, and it is said that it is adherent to the lens capsule here. Okay, so hyalocapsular ligament, also known as ligament of Wiegers, W-E-I or W-I-E, let me see. W-I-E-G-E-R apostrophe S. Okay, so that was about the different limbs of the zonules. Now, scanning electron microscopy has contributed greatly to our understanding of the anatomy of the zonule. The vast majority of the zonules arise from the posterior end of the pars plana up to 1.5 mm from the ora serrata, where they either run into posterior end of the pars plana up to 1. Okay, the majority of the zonules arise from the posterior end of the pars plana up to 1.5 mm from the ora serrata, where they run into its inner limiting membrane without entering the cytoplasm of the underlying cells, or become continuous with fibers of the anterior vitreous. Most fibers arise as bundles of 2 to 5 fibrils which blend with the basement membrane of the non-pigmented epithelium of the pars plana. Some fibrils occasionally penetrate between these cells in the absence of basement membrane. Fibrils have also been reported between the ciliary pigmented epithelium, its basement membrane, and extending into the elastic lamina of the Brooks membrane. Now, however, Steaton in 1992 suggests that these are more likely to be a mixture of fibrils found in aging basement membrane and microfibrils related to the elastic tissue of ciliary body stroma. The fibers pass forward over the pars plana as a fail to work until they reach the posterior margin of the pars placata. Here they segment into the zonular plexus which pass through the valleys between the ciliary processes to whose lateral walls they are closely attached. Each zonular plexus consists of broad flattened fiber strands which cross and join each other in regular pattern. The zonular plexuses are firmly attached to the bases of ciliary valleys by fine and coarse fibrils which leave the main strands and run anteriorly at an acute angle. These tension fibers find anchorage with the basement membrane within the depth of the valleys and are thought to play an important role in the accommodation process by stabilizing the zonules. Towards the anterior margin of the pars placata, each plexus divides into zonular fork, consisting of 3 fiber groups running to the anterior equatorial and posterior lens fibers. So, they have in short described the entire course of the ciliary zonules from the 1.5 mm from the ora serrata, pars plana, then valleys, following the course of the ciliary processes, valleys, that is the zonular plexus, then zonular fork, and the lens. In short, they have described again here in detail. So, the secondary anchorage is thought to be extremely important in relation to the accommodation. It is as it explains how an equatorial force is exerted upon the lens by fibers that originate partly in the pars plana without involving the older and unacceptable theories of a fulcrum of resistance being provided by the hyaloid phase of the Wiegers. The pre-equatorial, equatorial and post-equatorial insertions of zonules into the lens capsule are macroscopically different. Okay. The pre-equatorial insertions are relatively dense as they all insert at approximately the same distance from the equator, 1.5 mm, as an irregular double row of bundles 5 to 10 micrometer wide. Bundles decrease in width to insert over a zone of 0.3 to 0.4 mm in meridional width. The zonular insertions flatten in the plane of the capsule and then split up into ever smaller finger-like processes which fan out and finally run into the lens capsule to form the zonular lamella. They join a surface of loosely arranged microfibrils which blend into the fibrogranular matrix of the capsule. These fibrils are lost 1 mm center to the zonular insertion where the capsule resumes its normal patina. At the point of insertion, the anterior zonule sends fibers and smaller fibrils to a depth of 0.6 to 1.6 micrometer into the capsular surface. The zonular lamella thickens from 1 to 1.7 micrometer lateral to the anterior zonular insertions. The insertion of meridional zonular fibers 0.5 to 1 micrometer wide creates an anterior-posterior ribbon. It has been suggested that anterior zonules decrease in number with age and that the site of anterior insertion becomes displaced more centrally. The origin of the zonule from the pars plana is also thought to move anteriorly with age. The equatorial fibers are sparse and poorly developed, but again fan out in a brush-like manner to insert into capsule almost perpendicular to the surface. They rarely insert into the equator and are usually either just anterior or posterior to it. Fibers are usually 10 to 15 micrometer wide, but maybe up to 60 micrometer wide. They merge with the meridional fibers, which arch over the equatorial capsule. The posterior fibers insert into 2 to 3 layers over a zone of 0.4 to 0.5 mm wide. They fan out more and show less interconnections than the anterior zonule. Anteriorly, they insert at the posterior edge of the lens equator posterior edge of the lens equator close to the margin of the lens epithelium. Posteriorly, they extend about 1.25 mm from the equatorial margin. The fibers of the zonule insert into the capsule to a depth of about 2 micrometer. Both the posterior and meridional fibers are partly obscured by a thick layer of loosely arranged fibrils, which are of zonular type. The post-equatorial fibers appear relatively less well developed than the anterior ones, but this is probably illusory and results from the fact that they insert into the capsule at a variety of levels, with the hyaloid zonules being most central. Okay. The hyaloid zonule is a single layer connecting the anterior hyaloid at the border of the patellar fossa with the pars plana and pars baccata. It is undistinguished in the untouched eye because of its fibers are closely opposed to those of the posterior zonule. So there are numbers, and I don't think we need to remember the numbers. So in short, the anterior equatorial fibers, are well developed, and their insertion site is thicker and wider than the equatorial and post-equatorial fibers, and more central fibers are these hyaloid zonules. These are actually very difficult to distinguish from the posterior zonules. Okay, that's it. Then the space between the anterior and posterior zonules is known as the Canal of Hannover. This is very important. Actually, it is subdivided into larger and smaller spaces by the equatorial fibers. This is important because I usually forget what it means. Okay, Canal of Hannover and Canal of Petit. So the space between the anterior and posterior equatorial fibers of the zonules is called as Canal of Hannover, and obviously in between this equatorial zonule. So the Canal of Hannover is divided into two portions because of this equatorial zonule. And Streeter in 1992 has speculated that the mucoid character of the zonular fibers might offer a diffusion barrier between the posterior chamber and the vitreous. The space between the hyaloid zonule and the posterior zonule is the Canal of Petit. Okay, the space between the hyaloid zonule and the posterior zonule, that is post-equatorial fiber and the hyaloid zonule, is called as Canal of Petit. The arrangement of the zonular fibers is shown in the figure 12.43. These fibers with their relatively large interspaces give rise to the dentations of the lens equator with the crests corresponding to insertions and the valleys between. So, two spaces in this paragraph, two things to remember: Canal of Hannover and Canal of Petit. Canal of Hannover is between the anterior and the posterior zonule, that is pre-equatorial and post-equatorial zonules, and equatorial zonules, they divide the space into two regions. Then that was about the Canal of Hannover. The Canal of Petit. Canal of Petit is present between the posterior zonule and the hyaloid zonule. Okay, that's it. A narrow band of fibers extends forwards on the lens capsule from the point of attachment of the hyaloid zonule to the point of insertion of the posterior zonule. This hyalocapsular zonule probably corresponds to the ligament of Wiegers, and its fibers are mainly radial. Okay, radial. Where it joins with the anterior hyaloid membrane at the rim of patellar fossa, there is circular band of fibers. There is similar attachment of the anterior hyaloid to circular zonular girdles. Anterior and posterior orbicularis bands of Decker. I don't know the pronunciation, Decker. Over the posterior third of the ciliary processes and the middle of the pars plana. This is not very clinically significant. They have described the ligament of Wiegers and relation to that, they have compared it with the anterior and posterior circumferential zonular girdles. Okay. Now next is circumferential zonular girdles. This is also not very important, but I'll just read out once. A few flimsy circumferential structures lying in the relation to the ciliary body have been noted by Eisner in 1975. The anterior ciliary girdle lies over the ciliary crests and arises from branches of the posterior zonular bundles. It lies in and on the surface of the anterior hyaloid membrane, binding it to the ciliary processes and resisting the pull of the coronary vitreous tract, which inserts here. Neighboring vitreous collagen fibrils may have a circumferential orientation. It readily pulls away with the vitreous when it becomes detached. The circumferential zonular girdles, what is that? The first they have described is anterior circumferential or ciliary girdle, and it lies over the ciliary crests, and they arise from the branches of the posterior zonular bundles, and they resist the pull of the coronary vitreous tract. Now, what is coronary vitreous tract? That we'll see in the vitreous anatomy. It arises from the ciliary processes, okay, and extends posteriorly to the center of the vitreous. That we'll see in the vitreous anatomy. So, anterior vitreous girdle is the overlying the ciliary processes crests. Okay. Now, posterior girdle of the circularly disposed zonular fibers has been demonstrated in vitro over the ciliary processes again. Also, pars plana and posterior insertion of the zonule by several authors. Okay, and it has been shown by biomicroscopy on post-mortem eyes. This posterior zonular bundle lies on the pars plana at the internal surface of the main zonule 1 to 2 mm anterior to the ora serrata at a site into which the median vitreous tract inserts. Its fibrils have the same circumferential direction as those of the adjacent vitreous, perhaps reflecting the influence of similar traction forces on both structures. They are more aggregated and easier to observe in older eyes. So, posterior zonular girdle or posterior ciliary girdle, whatever it is, what it is, it lies over the ciliary processes, pars plana and posterior insertion of the zonule, and it has been demonstrated by biomicroscopy and post-mortem eyes, and it has been demonstrated in vitro over the ciliary processes, pars plana, posterior insertion of the zonule. Okay, and like this coronary vitreous tract, there is a median vitreous tract arising from the pars plana to the center of the vitreous. So this girdle, it resists these forces or the tensions created by this vitreous tract, median vitreous tract. Now, aberrant zonular fibers. The zonular fibers, these are aberrant, okay, not normal or not found in everyone. These are separate from the main zonular streams. These are commonly found close to the ora serrata. These are near the ora serrata. These aberrant zonular fibers are near the ora serrata in relation to retinal abnormalities. So these are more common in retinal abnormalities like zonular traction ducts first, meridional folds second, third is enclosed ciliary base, and fourth is peripheral rosettes or granulation. So these are the aberrant zonular fibers are more commonly near the ora serrata, and these are found in association with the retinal abnormalities like zonular traction ducts, meridional folds, then enclosed ciliary base and peripheral rosettes or granulation. Some zonular bundles may also pass back across the ora into the vitreous at all ages without attachment to the ciliary body. And some zonular bundles are there, zonular fibers. They pass from the ora serrata into the vitreous, but they don't attach to the ciliary body, any portion of the ciliary body. Now, after the second decade, occasional bundles of fibrils may be found in the equatorial capsule. These are believed by some to represent deep zonular insertions. However, no connection with the zonules has been demonstrated. Some material shows a banding at 45 to 55 nanometer and resembles fibrillar material found in aging basement membranes. Other fibrilo-granular material with the characteristics of zonular fibrils is found superficially but has no connection with the surface zonule. It has been suggested that this may represent a secretory product of the lens epithelium. So, age-related changes, okay. After the second decade, we can see there are some bundles of the fibrils in the equatorial capsule, and they show a banding at around 45 to 55 nanometer, okay. And they don't have, but they found no connection with the zonules, okay. Other type of fibrillogranular material like zonular fibrils, it was found superficially, but it showed no connection with the surface zonules, okay, and it has been suggested that this may represent a secretory product of the lens epithelium, okay. Now, aging of the zonule. The fetal and infantile zonular fibers are finer and less aggregated than in the adult. Finer, less aggregated than in the adult. Richer in proteoglycans. In the elderly, the fibers are finer and more sparse, especially the meridional ones, and they rupture more readily. Okay, so in fetal and infantile patients or human beings, The zonular fibers are finer and less aggregated and rich in proteoglycans, while in elderly these are finer, okay, these are again finer, sparse, especially the meridional ones, and they rupture readily, okay, more readily. In the first 2 decades of life, the zonular attachments are narrow. With the time, they broaden and move more centrally, both anteriorly and posteriorly. Anteriorly, the zonal free area of the capsule reduces from 8 mm at age 20 years to 6.5 mm in the 8th decade, or as low as 5.5 mm, so that the insertion may intrude into the region selected for capsulotomy during extracapsular cataract surgery. So what they are saying that in the first 2 decades of the life, the insertion of the zonules on the lens capsule, it's like a narrow band, but they extend anteriorly, posteriorly, even the centrally with time, and then sometimes even they can reach up to the 5.5 mm margin of the lens capsule anteriorly, leaving the 5.5 mm central area of the lens zonal free, okay, zonal insertion free. So that is very important because the capsulotomy, you know, ideal capsulotomy, it is 6 to 7 mm, depending upon the type of surgery also it is. So that is very important clinically, the zonal insertion. It extends as we age. In childhood, the anterior haloid membrane is closely attached to the whole posterior zonular insertion and the lens. Okay, so anterior haloid membrane, it is closely attached to the posterior zonular insertion and the lens. In the adult, anterior haloid membrane may be peeled back to the zonular insertion. We can peel back the anterior haloid membrane to the zonular insertion. Okay, its strongest point of attachment at all ages. During intracapsular extraction, a superficial flap or even the full thickness of lens capsule may be separated by this attachment, the posterior zonular complex and the circumferential complex. Okay, in childhood, we know that the anterior haloid face, it is in close contact with the posterior zonular fibers and the lens. So usually we go for the vitrectomy during the cataract extraction, capsulotomy, vitrectomy. So that's clinical significance. And in adults, we can just peel back the anterior haloid membrane from the zonular insertion. Okay, so during intracapsular cataract extraction, most of the zonular complex is torn from the capsule. Intracapsular cataract extraction, most of the zonular complex is torn from the capsule with only the tips of anterior zonular insertions and a few meridional fibers remaining. The zonule may also tear partially during extracapsular cataract surgery with rupture or a preferential separation of the posterior and meridional fibers from the capsule. About 5% of these dehiscences may be detected at the time of surgery, occurring during the removal of lens material as traction is applied to the zonule. More are identified at post-mortem. So what they are saying is that during extracapsular cataract extraction, during the lens matter removal, there is a stress on zonules. Zonules bear a lot of stress if it is not done correctly, and there can be tear. Okay, there can be zonular tear in about 5% of the cases, and these dehiscences may be detected at the time of the surgery, about 5% of the cases, and more are identified at the post-mortem. The zonule is weak in the disordered pseudoexfoliation of the lens capsule, and it is 4 times more likely to rupture during the cataract surgery than normally. During the pseudoexfoliation, glaucoma pseudoexfoliation of the lens capsule, the zonules are weak and they are more likely to rupture during the cataract surgery 4 times than normal. Then each zonular bundle associated with a major ciliary process forms a unit which emerges as a flat ribbon of bundles 30 to 60 micrometer wide, 6 to 10 per ciliary unit. It has been suggested that rubbing of the posterior iris across the zonule is responsible for iris pigment loss in pigmentary glaucoma. Rubbing of the posterior iris across the zonule, it is responsible for iris pigment loss in the pigmentary glaucoma. Okay. So that was about the ciliary zonules, And now we'll see the figures fast. Figure 12.41. Light micrograph of a meridional section of the anterior segment to show the drainage angle, iris, length, and ciliary body. AC stands for anterior chamber, CP ciliary body, CP ciliary processes, VF which is face, ZA anterior zonule, ZP posterior zonule, 1 posterior chamber, 2 Canal of Hannover, and 3 Canal of Petit. So we can see this is anterior chamber AC, IR is iris root, 1 is what? Posterior chamber, okay. 1 is posterior chamber, 2 is the Canal of Hannover. Canal of Hannover is between the anterior and posterior zonules. It is pre-equatorial and post-equatorial zonules, and divided into 2 regions by the equatorial zonules. Then third is Canal of Petit. Canal of Petit is between the post-equatorial, that is posterior zonule, and the hyaloid zonules. CP ciliary processes, CP ciliary body, ZP posterior zonules, VF which is face. ZA is anterior zonule. Now figure 12.42. Schema for the accommodating mechanism according to Rohan. Accommodating eye ciliary muscle contracted, forming an H. The tangent fiber system is stretched, taking up the traction from the posterior zonular fibers and choroid. Thus, the anterior zonular fibers become relaxed and the lens more spherical dotted line. The arrow indicates the direction of ciliary muscle movement during the accommodation. The arrow indicates the direction of the ciliary muscle movement during the accommodation. In the non-accommodating state, the ciliary muscle is relaxed and the anterior zonular fibers are stretched by the traction from posterior pars plana zonular fibers. The lens is therefore flattened. First thing, normally what happens, posterior zonular fibers are under stretch and this stress is reflected on the anterior zonules. So anterior zonules and posterior zonules are under stretch or under traction. In the normal state, in accommodation what happens, the ciliary muscles they contract and the traction is transferred from the posterior zonular fibers and choroid to the ciliary muscles. Okay, ciliary muscles they contract. Okay, this contraction of the ciliary muscles and the traction on the posterior zonule is removed, and hence the anterior zonules is removed and the lens, that is lens capsule that is under the stretch, is now relaxed and there is increase in the anterior curvature of the lens, okay, during accommodation, and thus increase the refractive power of the lens. That's the accommodation. Now figure 12.43, relationship of anterior vitreous to posterior chamber, Canal of Hannover, HAN, pars plana, PP, retina, R, ora serrata, OS, hyalio-orbicular space, HOS, that is Garnier space, Canal of Petit, CP, zonular portion of hyaloid membrane, ZAHM, posterior zonular fibers, PZF, posterior lens capsule, PLC, superior plica, SP, patellar portion of hyaloid membrane, PAHM. So there is retina, there is ora serrata. Okay, these are the zonules, anterior, posterior, and Canal of Petit in between the hyaloid zonules and posterior or post-equatorial zonules, Canal of Petit, Canal of Hanover between the anterior and posterior zonules, that is pre-equatorial and post-equatorial zonules. Now this is hyalio-orbicular space, hyalio-orbicular space. Now they have not given a text regarding it, but this is my own logic. Hyalio-orbicular space between the orbicular portion, pars orbicularis zonular portion, and the hyaloid portion or hyaloid zonules. It's that space, okay. Now figure 12.44, drawing of the inner aspect of the ciliary body to show the pars plica A and pars plana B. A is on the right hand side. If you zoom it out, you can see on left hand side in the upper portion, okay, there is A, very small a, and below that in the same line you can see the B. So A stands for the pars plica portion and B stands for the pars plana, and the ora serrata is at C, okay. Then posterior to it, the retina shows cystoid degeneration D. The base E and dentate processes F of the ora serrata are shown. Linear ridges or striae project forward from the dentate processes across the pars plana to enter the valleys between the ciliary processes. The zonular fibers arise from the pars plana beginning 1.5 mm from the ora serrata. They curve forward from the sides of the dentate ridges into the ciliary valleys, then from the valleys to the lens capsule. Zonules coming from the valleys on either side of a ciliary process have a common point of attachment to the lens on the lens. The zonules attach up to 1 mm from the equator posteriorly and up to 1.5 mm from the equator anteriorly. At the equatorial border, the attaching zonules give a crenated appearance to the lens. The ciliary processes vary in size and shape and often are separated from each other by laser processes. The radial edge and circular furrows of the peripheral iris are shown. Okay. I'm not going to repeat that thing. Figure 12.45, zonular fibers emerging from pars plana. Okay, so auxiliary fibers are the ciliary epithelium, vessels and ciliary muscles. Ciliary muscles, vessels, ciliary epithelium and auxiliary fibers. Orbicular-anterior capsular fibers. Orbicular-anterior capsular fibers over the pars plana. Elastic lamina. Okay. Figure 12.46. Scanning electron micrograph of zonules passing through the valleys in the pars placata. The zonules head pass between the ciliary processes C and then divide into three main systems at the zonular fork F before reaching the surface of the lens. At the posterior margin of the ciliary processes, the zonular fibers rearrange themselves to form a series of zonular plexus SP. As we know, the zonular plexus and zonular fork. Zonular plexus is in between the valleys of the ciliary processes. Angulation is fork and the limbs. Now, figure 12.47a, equatorial zone of the lens capsule with the insertion of the zonular fibers. B, the equatorial region of 46-year-old lens showing a numerous fine equatorial zonules, EZ, original magnification 200 times. C, the equatorial region of a 73-year-old lens showing a shift anteriorly of all zonules and the presence of equatorial line zonules, EZ, on the anterior lens face. Original magnification 200 times. D, the anterior surface of two suspended human lenses ages 46 and 85 showing an increase in insertion equatorial distance A with age, a consistency insertion ciliary body distance B, and a decrease in the circumlental space C. Original magnification 20. Any apparent size difference in the ciliary processes in the two sections is related to observed changes due to age and to the varying amounts of ciliary processes exposed by dissection. Figure 12.48a. Zonular insertions into the pre-equatorial lens capsule. B. Scanning electron micrographs of the post-equatorial surface of a human lens to show the sparsity of the zonules and the variety of levels at which they insert. This discontinuity in fiber insertions gives rise to the dentations of the lens. So here I conclude the ciliary zonules, and next video I am going to talk about the Marfan syndrome. Thank you so much for listening to me patiently. Good night and take care.